everyone. Today we're talking all about powders. Now, if you've watched me for a while, or even more than a couple of times, you'll know my skin is dry and I don't wear powders very often. And when I say powders today, I'm referring to finishing powders and setting powders. We're first going to go into what they are, what their purposes are, how to use them, and then I'm going to give you some examples of which is which. And then we're going to get into the nuance of, well, what if it's both? Hang in there. So the first thing I want to say is I'm looking at more than 20 loose powders and about the same amount of pressed powders in my collection. Why do I have so many powders when I generally don't wear powder? Well, part of it is because all of you out there have asked me to review a lot of powders, and I get it. And two, even if your skin is dry and even if you don't wear like powder every day, powder can be an important step in your makeup routine depending on what you're trying to do. And different powders have different purposes. That is kind of blurred over the years. So if you went back to when not when I first started using makeup, because I was playing makeup artist on my sister, geez, like 40 years ago. But if you went back, let's say, well, actually 40 years ago, if you go back to look at how makeup was done, there were more strict rules in a way for the makeup industry. There was like, okay, you use this powder for this, you use this powder for this, you do this for this. That's kind of gone by the wayside. To be honest, use anything you want for any reason you want, right? People use lipstick for blush and you get the idea. So I don't want you to take anything I say today as this must be the way it is. But I want to give you a better understanding of all the powders that are out there and the powders that you might have in your collection already and really what they're for. Because when I look at these 40 so odd, powders, even as I was looking at them, wasn't sure how they were described. I knew how I used them, but I wasn't necessarily sure how they were marketed, which is a big difference. So let's talk about the difference between a setting powder and a finishing powder. I'm actually going to have a cheat sheet guide over for my members. I'm going to post it, and I might have it on Discord as well. If you're not a member, you hit that join button down below. You can sign up. It's a small monthly fee, gives you all the details. But I think the cheat sheet might actually help some of you guys, but let's break it down. The purpose and function of each of these. The setting powder locks your makeup in place. So it reduces the shine and it prevents creasing. The idea of a setting powder that will probably be the most visual for you is baking. Like when you bake your makeup, when that was very popular 10 years ago or so, that was a setting powder. Its purpose is to lock the makeup, reduce the shine on your face, and stop creases from forming. A finishing powder is going to blur and soften the appearance and add like an airbrush look. So those are the two purposes. Doesn't mean that you can't use different things for different reasons, but that's the purpose of the product. Then when to apply it. So the setting powder is after your foundation and your concealer. So you put your foundation on, your concealer on, and before you put your blush on, before you put your bronzer on, before you do anything else, then you could put it on, you could do your eyes if you wanted, because you can do your eyes first and then, foundation and stuff. But you are going to put the blush and bronzer over the setting powder. That's the idea. Or let it bake and then put those products on. The finishing powder would be the last step. The last part of your makeup routine. It's the soft focus finish of your look. You can also use a setting spray or a finishing spray, but we won't get into that today. The texture and look of the powders. The setting powder is generally fine. It has a denser texture, and it can be matte or satin. And we'll get into that about the different setting powders versus the different finishing powders I have. A finishing powder is ultra fine. It's always silky and it creates like a soft focus, a luminous look as well. So you could have something that's like a demi matte even, and it could be a finishing powder. Or it could be a very glowy look, could also be a finishing powder. But it's ultra fine. It's going to be finer than your setting powder and it's going to be very, very silky. So that's how you can tell when you feel a powder. Even if the powder says it's multi-use or the powder says it's a setting powder, if you feel it and it feels like extra fine and it's not dense at all and it feels very silky, the purpose of it can be used for a finishing powder on your face. Now you could also use it for a setting powder. And again, we'll get into that. There's all different types. The setting powders come in a loose translucent, a pressed, or tinted, and finishing powders are the same. They come in HD powders, they come in radiant blurring powders, they come in all different types. So it's not necessarily whether or not it's a pressed powder or a loose powder that determines it. It's the actual feel and ingredient of the powder and what its purpose is. The best use cases for these types of powders. It does depend, again, on how you want to use them. So these are generalizations. Let's put that there, okay? A setting powder works best on oily or combination skin. If you're locking in a product like concealer, if you're locking in your concealer, then setting powder works. If you're baking, you're definitely going to use a setting powder. You would not use a finishing powder for that. Or if it's a hot and humid climate. If you are in a tropical climate, you're more than likely going to want to use, and especially if your skin is oily, you're going to want to use a setting powder to set the makeup, because the humidity is going to make the makeup break down. Finishing powders are best for mature and textured skin, or textured skin. Special events or photography, so like, the flash, you don't want something that's too cakey on your skin, because you'll get sort of this bounce back, which I'll explain. One particular powder does that really well. If you have a powdery finish, like your face looks too powdery, too dry, you can actually take something like a finishing powder and give it a little bit more of luminescence if you have one that's more that way. You can also use sprays for that. And then light touch-ups throughout the day. So like if you're out and you're doing stuff, running around, you can press a finishing powder into your skin. It helps blur. You can use both of these in your makeup routine all at once. Like they can be used for different steps. I would not necessarily suggest that for people who have very dry skin or very mature skin. Again, it depends. You could have very mature skin and still be very oily. So again, that's not the average, but it does happen. So you could use your foundation and then set it with setting powder. And then you could then take the finishing powder at the end and use it like in your T-zone or under your eyes or on your cheekbones to give it a more luminous effect for those areas. But again, it is powder. Even though the finishing powder is ultra fine, if your skin is exceedingly dry, it might be too dry for you. So today on my face, I have on my foundation, I have on the Gucci bronzer on my eyes and on my face, and then I just have the Dolce & Gabbana lip on. That's it. That's all I have on my face, because I want to show you how you would use a setting powder versus a finishing powder and what the difference is. So I have all these different powders. I have a ton of them. Okay, so the Dior Forever Cushions, these. I have a ton of these. They come in different shades, but as a general rule, these are a setting powder, but they're a setting powder that has a subtle radiance without a powdery effect. So here's the thing. If they have a radiance to them and they said they're a setting powder, you have to wonder, you're like, well, is it a setting powder or is it a finishing powder? I think the way that I use the Dior powders is as a finishing powder. I feel like they are very finely milled, especially the ones that have like the lavender to them. It's a brightening powder, and I feel like it works as a finishing powder. The one that has the little sparkles all over it, I don't know what that is, but definitely was meant as a finishing powder. So although it might be described as a setting powder, that really means very little when it compares to how you're going to use it on your face. Is it as finely milled as some other powders that I have that are finishing powders? No. So I feel like that one can kind of be a multi-use. It's going to depend on your skin. Saint Laurent. The Saint Laurent, this is the brand new All Hours Hyper Blur. And it says multi-use. But the minute you get into blurring, right, the idea of that is that's a finishing powder. Can you use it as a setting powder? Probably, but that's not really its purpose. The purpose is to blur or to give you luminosity to your skin is a finishing powder. So again, this is where things start to get complicated, because some are very clearly setting and they say so. Others, not so much. Chanel is a setting powder originally. So their original, and I have it here if I can grab it out from all these other powders. The original Chanel powder is the Poudre Universelle Libre, and it says Natural Finish Loose Powder. So actually in its name, it says finish. But its purpose is to even skin tone and set your makeup. So originally this was used to set your makeup down. And the way you would do this is basically like you've seen, you know, a million people do. Take a pad of some kind. You can dump the color, because it's one of those, into the cap like this and place it on. Now, if you were to bake your powder, bake your face, you would put a lot of powder, which I don't do, but I'll put more than I put, you know, on any normal day. And you just kind of like press it across your face with a lot more than you need. And then you brush it off. You can see how that looks. The idea though is what's happening is it's sinking into your skin and setting everything. The Chanel powder though, it is thicker than some of the other powders I own. So I could see how it would set your makeup. I don't think it's particularly blurring, and it does have a little bit of coverage. So I use that as more of a setting powder. However, the Chanel stuff is actually so finely milled that I'm not so sure. There are Chanel powders, however, that are pressed that are Healthy Glow sheer powders, and they look like this, and these are luminous. These are definitely finishing powders. They're meant to be, they have a luminous finish to them. They make it very clear that that's what they are. Then if you get into Suku, Suku has like 5 different types of powders, and I have several of them here. I'm just like, okay. So the loose powder they have in general, and you can see I have multiple kinds of Suku powders here. Suku. Depending on, sorry, that was Sisley. Suku. Depending on the type of Suku powder that you're using, I wrote notes, so I'm referring to my notes. The loose powder enhances skin's clarity and provides a radiant complexion. So basically what you're saying is, okay, radiant finishing. The smooth matte loose powder controls shine and sets makeup. I don't have that powder because, again, I don't generally set my makeup, so because I have drier skin, so I don't have that one. The Oil Rich Glow Loose Powder, which is the one that I have in the lavender, and I also have it in, is it rose? I have it in something. I think it's this one, yeah. It's like a rose shade. The lavender one's my favorite. These are technically setting powders. They are meant to set your makeup, but also give you a glow, similar to what the Chanel says. These, however, I feel are so finely milled and so brightening in nature that I like these as a finishing powder. I would not use these as setting. But the way that they have been designed and the ingredients that are in them, they are designed to set your makeup as well without drying out your skin. So if you're somebody who wants that brighter, dewy finish, but you still want to set your makeup, you can do that with that product. So again, it gets a little bit more complicated, I know, but the purpose is something like that, is a setting powder and a finishing powder that will allow you to have a dewier finish so that you don't have to look powdery. And this has come up because, frankly, over time, more people have, like me, said, well, I have dry skin, but I still have some oily parts. I want to be able to set my skin, but I don't want it to look powdery. And that's how you're starting to get these products like the Suku one that has like an oil rich. It's got some dewy emollients to it. So I'm going to brush this away. And see how it's left like this sort of brightening under here? That's fine. And it can look really good on camera. As I'm, you know, like doing this type of stuff, but out in nature, it can look a little odd. You want to be careful about how much you leave or how much has actually sunk in. The Chanel is pretty good. The Chanel works, in my opinion, the Chanel works to an extent that you don't really have to worry about it very much, but other powders are not as good and they will just sit on top of your skin. So just keep that in mind. So after you've done something like that, that's when you would take your blush, your creamy blush, and put it on top. Because what that does is it makes it last longer. If you're somebody who has dry skin like me, I can tell you right now, my skin feels like the Sahara Desert. It does, it feels super dry. But if you're not, if you're somebody who has oilier skin or even just average skin, this is gonna stop your, well, I shouldn't say stop. This is gonna help prevent your blush from getting eaten up by your face. So when you have those, you know, I hear comments all the time, oh, my blush disappears. Try this. Try putting a setting powder on your face first, then the blush. And you don't have to bake. You can just, you know, press it in. You don't have to do it like I just did. But give your face some of that setting powder first and then put a cream blush on. You're gonna notice a difference. Okay, so there's Givenchy and there's Guerlain. Now, both have changed their formulas of their powders. I'm not going to talk about the Meteorites powders today because, and they are behind me. They correct because there's different colors in those, and technically you could set with those because they are a denser powder, but I wouldn't set your makeup with Meteorites. Meteorites are meant as, to me, they're meant as a finishing powder to give your face radiance at the end. I suppose you can set with them technically because they are denser, but I don't think that's the purpose. Again, that's my take on it. But now the radiant loose powder that Guerlain has reinvented, the Powder Gold Skin Diamond Micro Powder, this is a finishing powder. First of all, anytime something says micro, it's super finely milled. That's the first thing. And second of all, diamond, gold skin, all of that, it's reflective, it's blurring, it's the finishing of your product. So that's the purpose of something like that. You could use, I mean, again, you can use anything for anything, but it's not gonna work right as a setting powder because it's not as dense. It's not meant to be a soaking up crease filling powder. That's not its purpose. Givenchy. Now, Givenchy is interesting because, again, I don't know what, you know, they had a whole thing. But the Prisme Leesberry loose powder is supposed to create shades to correct and illuminate. Okay, these are old ones, obviously. This is before they changed. And the one I have is Sparkling Lilac and Lumiere Polaire. That's terrible, but anyway, these are loose powders that have 4 different shades in them, or 2 different shades depending, and you dump them basically into the cap and you get a very shimmery finish. It is a finishing powder. It was one of the best finishing powders, in my opinion, on the market, and these are prized possessions because they're not quite the same. The pressed powder is the same idea, and these are supposed to blur imperfections, but can also set makeup. That would be the difference between the two. The loose powder was not original. I don't know what it does now because I don't have the new ones. But the original powder, loose powder, was not meant to set. Again, you can use it for any purpose you like, but that was not the original intention. The pressed powders, however, are meant to do both, and if you can tell that for 2 reasons. One, it says mattifying and blurring setting powder on the box. I like it when they actually just tell you what it is. So that is why I'm telling you, like, because it's a denser powder. It's meant to set. It's going to soak up oil, but also can illuminate. Now, I recently bought the new one that was reformulated again in 01 Mousseline Pastel. And I was talking about how I was going to get the Voile Rose if I had time, blah, blah, blah. Turns out I have the Voile Rose, the old formula, which I find interesting because I didn't realize I had it. So I had this the entire time. So that's the old version. And now I have the new version. Now I don't have the same colors, obviously, but I have the old formula and the new formula. And what I can tell you about the old versus the new is more pigmented. This is the new. I know the shades are different, but just the amount of pigment that comes off my hand, off my fingers. The new one's silkier, it's more pigmented, and it's lighter. The other one, the older one, is heavier. So what I would say is the old one was a better setting powder and this one's a better finishing powder. What that really means is that this one has more of a luminescent blurring effect, whereas the old one had more of a setting, non-creasing, oil absorbing effect and more mattifying. Now the new one still mattifies. I mean, I've used it and I can tell you it's a very good powder. And for me, I actually like this formula more than the old one. But, and I've been using them before I put this video together, so I would have all this knowledge and write all these notes. But for those of you out there who have an oilier skin tone and liked the powder for its mattifying and oil absorbing feature, that's why you might not like the new one as much. So it's similar, but it is not the same. And I can now prove that because I've been using the two of these and they do work differently. Again, it is described as a mattifying and setting powder. So its purpose was different than the loose version. It was meant to like do what I just did with the Chanel. However, it was also meant to give you luminescence and use it as a finishing powder if you want to. I think originally, I bet you what they did is had the pressed idea be like, oh, okay, we'll use that for setting, especially when baking was big, and then the loose powders as the finishing. That's kind of the, behind designing somewhere, I think that's where it came into their minds. However, in practice, you can use the setting powder, the pressed powder for both, and it will work, especially the newer one, because it has more luminosity to it. It's not like the reformulation that was terrible, not like that, but it's not as mattifying as the original. All right, so By Terry. By Terry is a product that was incredibly popular 15 years ago. It's still popular, but there's this white powder, and I have it in a very tiny jar. Very tiny because this stuff is super powerful. This powder was on like every star you ever saw in a photograph. And it blurs imperfections and it sets your makeup, but it's hydrating at the same time. If you can just see how much this I'll just put it on a little bit more, you'll notice very quickly how it blurred my hand. That part where the powder's on, completely blurred. So it's an amazing powder and it works beautifully. Like if you want to mattify your face somewhere and you want to set something, use this. It's hydrating, so it feels kind of like the Suku. It's got like oil in it or something. So it does not dry out your skin. I used to put this under my eyes and it was the most amazing, immediately blurred, made everything look like a zillion times better. Makeup Forever has one. It's called the HD High Definition Setting Powder. This one is very similar to the By Terry. In fact, they copied By Terry when they came out with it. By Terry then came out with ones in different shades. This one is in Rosy Light, and it does the same thing. The problem with the white powder from By Terry was that you'd set it under your eyes and you would look like blurred perfection, but the minute a camera hit it, it would bounce back and you'd have a big white streak under your eyes. So if you've ever seen a star like photographed and they had that big white, that's what that is. It's probably the By Terry powder. So that's the problem with that powder, which is why they came up with like the rosy colors and stuff, because they don't do that. Now, new versions of By Terry don't have that anymore. In fact, By Terry came out with pressed powders that all work extremely well and they have different shades to them. These are all blurring and setting, and they are amazing powders. The By Terry powders blur like nobody's business and were like the powder for the longest time. I generally don't use By Terry anymore under my eyes because now at my age, I just generally don't use powder at all under my eyes. But if I'm going to, and I know I'm not going to be photographed, I would definitely take some of that, either use my finger or use a very, very fluffy brush and just kind of press it, like, press with the brush under my eyes, and that's about it. But frankly, that's been replaced by, other powders that have more advanced than the By Terry. But that was the purpose of that product. And it was revolutionary for its time, which is why everybody used it, because it was setting and brightening without, making your skin look very dry. And it was an amazing product. Clé de Peau. This is one of the best powders on the market. This one's hard to find. And I still don't know if they're reformulating this because they've been switching up stuff. So this is a radiant finish. It sets your makeup, and it also can be used as a finishing powder because it has a luminosity to it that is second to none. I use it as a finishing powder, but I use a very fluffy brush and just brush it all over. You can definitely set your makeup with this. Like I did with the Chanel though, it's not a problem. Because it has this density to it that will soak up oil, but it's not heavy and it's not mattifying because it gives a radiant finish. So it can work as both. That's really the key. You'll find, if you find something, a powder that has a radiant finish or a luminous finish, even though it might be a setting powder, you can use it as both. The difference will be that you'll find if you use the Clé de Peau, for example, with a powder puff as a finishing powder, it may be too heavy and too cakey for someone with dry skin or more mature skin. Whereas somebody with oilier skin might be able to do that and not have a problem. It's the density of the powder, how tiny it is. If it has micro in its name, it's most likely a finishing powder because it's really super tiny, ultra finely milled. And that's kind of the purpose of it. So Sisley, there are different Sisley powders, but this one is the Phyto Poudre Libre powder. And this is a velvety matte finish. So this mattifies the complexion, but it also is hydrating. It doesn't dry out my skin. However, I don't really like the finish because it's a velvety matte finish. So if you're looking for a velvety matte finish, Sisley is the way to go. But can you see how it looks like thicker? It also does blur. So you could use this as a finishing powder, but it's going to give you a velvety matte finish. I like it better for a setting powder, and like I said, I don't really use setting powders very often. Swede, I told you guys, I have a lot of powder. Swede, this is the Miracle powder. This is buildable. You can use it to blur and even out your tone. This is a little bit different in the sense that it almost is like a foundation. Like you can use it almost like a foundation or in lieu of a foundation or, you know, something on your skin. I would say it's more of a finishing powder than anything else, but I think this is almost in its own, a newer category where it's almost like, that's what they call it, a miracle powder. It's not really either. It's not really a finishing powder or a setting powder. It's in lieu of other powders, but it can also be used as, you know, a setting powder. I wouldn't call it a finishing powder though, because I don't really think it has a luminescence, but it also does blur. This one's tough. So I guess I would kind of put it in this hybrid category that we've seen more and more of over the last couple of years. But I, to be honest, don't use the Swede powder as much because it's a little heavier for my skin. It's a really good powder, and I know people who do love it tend to be a little bit oilier, or they use it by itself. Then Kojendo. Kojendo's had a number of different powders over the years, but this is the, I'm going to say their name wrong, Mafanzi face powder. It's very silky, and this actually, what it does, it absorbs oil, and it gives a brightening effect to your skin. Where I used this, and I don't really use it anymore, is here. Because it absorbs the oil in your T-zone, which is where I do get some oil, and it brightens your face. And I like a brightener. But where I usually do powder nowadays anyway, is like under my eyes so that the mascara doesn't get on there, and sometimes just right through here. And there's other powders that I like better for that now. So I don't use this one as often, but it's a good powder. Rare Beauty, this is a radiant powder in its finish. It is a setting powder. That is the purpose of this. It controls shine, but it also does blur. So, which back in the day, the setting powders didn't do that. That's what I'm saying. So like things have started to morph. But yeah, this is definitely a setting powder. I don't generally use it, but you can use it to do what I did with the Chanel powder earlier. I just bought it to show all of you guys more than anything else. Now, there are a couple powders that I just want to call out that, like I said, there's some, as I was going through all that kind of morph into one another, which is fine. You can decide how you want to use them. The Dior powder that doesn't exist anymore, this is the Dior Backstage powder. This was a face and body powder that it was perfecting and blurred your skin to a matte finish. And I did a video about the 90s look. This would have been, this would have been perfect for that. If you were looking for that type of look, this is gone now. This has been discontinued. Unless they brought it back and I do not know. It is literally meant to mattify. So something like this doesn't work for me because I just don't really mattify my skin. It's not a thing. The Chantecaille powders, however, are all very luminescent in their nature. They have loose powders and they have pressed. I have both. This one, the Eclat Dew, is one of the best, in my opinion, illuminating powders on the market. It's absolutely stunning. It gives a very, very luminescent look to it. And you can use that to just give some luminescence to your face, but you can also use it to, get rid of a little bit of shine if you need to. The other one that's super popular and continues to be is the finishing powder from the Radiant Blur powder, which is now just a regular compact. This was in the Bird compact, but this, if you're looking for something to blur and you want something that's gonna mattify, this stuff is amazing. Like if you don't want a luminescent finish, go with this one. And Chantecaille has loose powders that have gorgeous radiant finishes, which I prefer because I like that kind of finish. The finishing powder that I always used, and to this day still think is one of the best on the market, is the Charlotte Tilbury. And it's in that new Polly Pocket, palette that Sophia and Michelle and I were making fun of. But in those palettes, the light shade, the peach and the pink, that's what this is. It's this, but with color. And this originally came in fair and lighter. There weren't a lot of shades. I know there's more shades to it now. But this Flawless Finishing Powder is one of the best finishing powders ever. It blurred, not mattified, it gave it like a it gave like a blurred focus. It was soft focus, perfect powder. And I still love this powder to this day. However, there's ones now that, have replaced most of these powders for me. And if you were to ask, like, what powders do I generally use? There's not many. There's the Suku powder in the lavender. And I also use the one in Dior because I like that lavender brightening finish. There's the Givenchy Lavender Lilac, again, because it has that brightening finish. There's the new Saint Laurent, which I bought in blue because, again, brightening. These are all brightening powders because that's what I need or want in my looks. There's the Westman Atelier. Now, it comes in creme like this, which is a really good shade that works all over as a setting powder, and it does blur. You can do both with this. But the pink bubble is what I use to set my under eyes, because what I'm using this for is so that it won't transfer to, mascara won't transfer to it. And then I also want brightness. And the pink does that in a way that practically no other powder can do. For me, because of my coloring. So this is like my favorite thing ever. Now, all of these powders, every single one of these powders is completely blown out of the water by this. This powder is the Solar Glow Bare Skin Beautifier. So they don't even call it in its title a powder. Below it says Universal Blurring Powder. So this would be used as a finishing powder. It's not a setting powder per se. It's incredibly finely milled. It is pressed. And when I first bought it, I thought it was going to be like the By Terry because I was like, oh, that's, it looks like the By Terry. And in essence, it is, but it's like an updated By Terry powder. This powder blurs, brightens, sets your skin, makes you look perfected, and you don't have to worry about anything for the rest of the day, and it brightens as well. I don't know what was in this powder. I don't know how they made it. I don't know why they discontinued it. The fig powder that I bought, that was the recreation, if you will, of this powder. It's not the same. And if you can get your hands on this, you should. Because it's one of a kind as far as I can tell. So guys, that's powder. That's all I have to say to you about powder. If you have questions, certainly let me know. I will have something, like I said, up for members on Discord, and I'll post about it, like a cheat sheet, how to use finishing, how to use setting powders. But if you ever like really just don't know and you're flummoxed and you're looking at all your stuff and you're like, I'm at a loss. If it says luminescent somewhere and or micro, ultrafine, any of those things, probably the best way to use it is a finishing powder. And a finishing powder can be used with a powder puff if that's what you want to do, or a brush. Depends on how you like your makeup and what, you know, what your skin is like. And a setting powder is going to be denser, like heavier, and more mattifying. If it says something like oil control, that's a setting powder. And I went through the steps about how to use them and when. So hopefully all that was helpful. Now we all know how to use all these powders. And strength, you know, frankly, there's like half these powders that I could get rid of, but I feel like I need them for, you know, explanation purposes. So I'd love to hear what are your favorite powders and how you use them. And if this was helpful, I hope it was. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys. I really do appreciate it. I hope to see you in another video really soon.